Hello students, welcome to the MOOC course on Understanding Global Politics. Today I will discuss on Bretton Woods institutions, its evolution, role and impact on global economy. In recent years, global economic and social policy is basically governed by three institutions. These institutions are known as Bretton Woods institutions. These institutions are International Monetary Fund or IMF, World Bank and WTO or World Trade Organization. It is believed that these three institutions has implemented the liberalization process in the global economy. These institutions are assigned to stabilize global economic order, maintain relationships between anti-Soviet Union countries, and to maintain the political relationship between US and its allies, and also to maintain US sovereignty which has been created after the Second World War. In this module, I will discuss the economic impact of these Bretton Woods institutions. So before that, I will first discuss the evolution and the functions and objectives of these institutions. First, let me start with evolution of these Bretton Woods institutions. These Bretton Woods institutions actually started to govern the global economy after the Second World War. Before that, especially from 1870 to up to First World War, the economy was actually open. That means movement of goods from one country to another country was free. At the same time, movement of people, especially the Europeans, were free to move all over the world without any restrictions. And during that period, though there were few disruptions or few instability occurred, few financial crises occurred during that period. However, the total, if we see the total period, we'll see that economic growth was very good during that period. And there were there were many evidences that many countries, like low-income countries, converges to middle-income countries, and middle-income countries also converge to high-income countries. Now, after this First World War, many international organizations and many governments failed to restore the global economy to the situation of pre-First World War period. In 1924, the global economy made open again. But crisis started from that point of time. And finally, in 1929, what happened that many economic crises started to occur in many countries, and that led to the devastating economic crises of the recent economic history, that is Great Depression of 1930s that occurred, and that depression led to the uprise of Nazism in Germany and fascism in other parts of the world. Now, the Great Depression of 1930, that is attributable to many reasons. Among them, important are competitive regulation system and competition among the different countries, devaluation and economic nationalism, etc. In 1944, 44 allied nations met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, United States to create a new monetary order, and a consensus emerged which actually cancelled the previously monetary order which relied on market economy, and government started to intervene to control the monetary system. And United States and United Kingdom, they started to make a plan for the new economic order, the Anglo-American plan that was sanctioned by the Bretton Woods Conference, and ultimately that plan started to lead the new monetary system in the global economy. Now I will discuss the Bretton Woods system. Under this Bretton Woods system, it was fixed that the global currency will be fixed at a fixed rate, and it was decided that gold would be the standard and all the countries would fix their currency against gold, and international trade will be free, and all these aspects will be governed or monitored by the International Monetary Fund or IMF. And another institution, which was International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as World Bank, that was given the task of recovering the European countries after the Second World War. Now the funds with this IBRD or World Bank was very limited. As a result of that, from 1947, United States started to intervene, and they started to deliberately give American dollars to help this World Bank. Actually, America or United States started to do this deliberately to increase the importance of dollar in the global economy, and ultimately in global economy, dollar became the main currency of exchange. Now the Bretton Woods Conference actually established that International Monetary Fund or IMF will maintain the liquidity in the world, and this IMF set up a major source of disagreement between the countries which actually lending to the IMF, that means those countries which are in surplus with surplus fund, and the countries which are actually borrowing from this IMF, and this borrowing country, among this borrowing country, leading was UK, and in lending countries, leading role was played by United States. So the two main architects, United States and United Kingdom, they were actually with different or just polar opposite view. Now the second thing was that International Bank for Reconstruction and Development or World Bank will create or reconstruct or help the European countries to recover from the war, from the destruction made by Second World War that I have already mentioned. Along with this World Bank will provide fund to to developing countries of Asia, Africa, and other less developed countries. Now this World Bank was believed to help this less developed countries because they believed that private investment in these less developed countries were not possible because of poor infrastructure, as well as World Bank also believed that by providing the funds to the less developed countries, they will actually remove the conflicts between the colonies. Another thing was that the International Trade Organization or ITO was supposed to be made during that period. The two world institutions, Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank and IMF, was created in 1940s. However, ITO or International Trade Organization, that was not materialized because of many reasons that I will discuss later. Instead of this ITO, GATT, G-A-T-T, that means General Agreements on Tariff and Trade, that was created for an interim period. And that GATT was subsumed by WTO or World Trade Organization in 1995. Now I will discuss objectives and functions of Bretton Woods institutions. First, I will start with IMF or International Monetary Fund. Objectives of IMF. The main objective of IMF is to promote international monetary cooperation and to facilitate expansion of trade. The membership of IMF consists of 153 countries, which covering 80% of the total world trade, and its membership is prerequisite for membership in World Bank. Now the functions of IMF: to facilitate and expand balanced growth of international trade, and through this maintain a high level of employment and real income. Second function is to maintain orderly exchange arrangements among members and to avoid competitive exchange depreciation. Third function is to eliminate foreign exchange restrictions which hampers growth of the world trade. Now I will discuss the objectives and functions of World Bank, which was established in 1945. World Bank had two affiliated institutions. These institutions are International Finance Corporation, established in 1952, and another one is International Development Association, which was established in 1960. Now I am going to the objectives of World Bank. First objective is to assist in the reconstruction and development of the member states, including restoration of economies destroyed or disrupted by war, by facilitating capital investments. Second is to promote foreign investment by means of guarantees or participation in loans and other investments made by private investors. Third one is it was to supplement private investment by providing or creating suitable conditions, finance for productive purposes out of its own capital funds raised by it and its other resources. Fourth is to promote long-range balanced growth of international trade and maintain stability and balance of payment by encouraging international investment of the productive resources of the members. Now the functions of World Bank. The bank generally lends for the projects which are designed to contribute directly to economic productivity of a country instead of social improvement such as education and health. For this purpose, it assesses the repayment prospect of loans by taking into account the availability of natural resources, the country's past debt record, etc. Second function is to, in recent years, it has stepped up in its lending for energy development, which has a direct link with economic development. In 1983, the bank initiated its Special Action Program for a 2-year period designed to increase assistance to countries trying to cope with an exceptionally difficult economic environment due to global recession. This comprised financial measures combined with policy advice needed to restore creditworthiness and growth. Now another institution, that is World Trade Organization. Before going to discuss its objectives and functions, I will discuss the its previous institutions, that means GATT. Actually, Bretton Woods institutions, which I have already mentioned, that in the conference it was decided that International Trade Organization will be created. Now accordingly, in Havana, a charter was created on creation of International Trade Organization. Now United States rejected that Havana Charter because of the conflict between the people with two different interests. One believed in multilateral trade, whereas another kind of people who believed that a nation should maintain its domestic employment policies. So the countries opted for a interim period, temporary GATT for interim period, and that interim period was actually more than 50 years. And the main function of GATT or was that, or its uniqueness was that principles of non-discrimination and principle of reciprocity. Now, this GATT actually failed to prohibit creation of different economic blocks among which trade was free, and ultimately it was GATT actually organized different rounds of negotiations, and it actually organized 8 negotiations, and the last or 8th negotiation that occurred in Uruguay, and that is basically for known as Uruguay round of negotiations. And the last it's actually followed 3 main issues. First is trade related intellectual property rights, or TRIPS. Second one is trade related investment measures, or TRIM, and trade in agricultural commodities. Actually, the negotiations occurred in GATT that was not in favor of developing countries. First of all, the TRIPS, or trade related intellectual property rights, actually according to this issue, property rights will be liberalized, and that will likely to affect the developing countries negatively, because if property rights were waived, then the laborers or the employment in the developing countries will be difficult for the citizens of the developing countries, because they have to face the competition from the from the employees of the foreign countries. And that TRIMS also was not in favor of the developing countries. And GATT also discussed the issue on agriculture. Actually, United States wanted that agriculture should be made free from any kind of subsidies. However, European Economic Commissions was in against of this. Now, this Uruguay round was likely to end within 4 years, that is in 1990. However, that Uruguay round was actually in a deadlock situation, so the Director General Arthur Dunkel had to intervene by his own recommendations, and in his recommendation he actually recommended that all kinds of external subsidies or export subsidies, as well as non-tariff barriers should be removed. And the proposals given by Drunkel, as well as the GATT negotiations, that all these proposals were actually against the developing countries, and actually they ignored the fact that MNCs or multinational corporations were actually exploiting the developing countries. So ultimately, this World Trade, Uruguay round was ended in 1995, and the Dunkel proposal that was signed by many countries in 15th December 1993, and in Indian it was ratified in 1994, and on 1st January 1995 World Trade Organization was created, and it started to operate from 1995. And this World Trade Organization that started to function along with IMF and World Bank, it had 117 countries within it, and it consists of 2/3 of its member as the developing countries. Now, the functions of WTO are: the most important function is to promote growth by facilitating trade. It supervises the implementation, administration, and operation of the agreements. It provides a forum for negotiations and settling disputes. Additionally, WTO has other functions. This function is to facilitate the implementation, administration, and operation, and further the objective of this agreement and the multilateral trade agreements, and shall also provide the framework for the implementation, administration, and operation of the multilateral trade agreements. It will also provide the forum for negotiations among its members concerning their multilateral trade relations in matters dealt with under agreement in the annexes to this agreement. The WTO will administer the understanding on rules and procedures governing the settlement of disputes. It will also administer a trade policy review mechanism, and its another function was to achieve greater coherence in global economic policy making. The WTO shall cooperate as appropriate with the International Monetary Fund and with the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and its affiliated agencies. Now, economic policies are not free from social and political impacts. Up to 1970, the global economy was governed by mainly IMF and World Bank, as the exchange rate was fixed and controlled by them. Now, after 1970, actually they lost one of their main function. After that, the main aim of IMF was to maintain a situation so that new type of economic crisis does not arise. At the same time, its objective was to maintain global demand. And its task was to diagnose any kind of problems that are creeping. In that case, they have to prevent, and in those situations which are not being able to prevent, in that case, directly intervene. Now, intervention and financial support and as well as technical support that is provided by these Bretton Woods institutions by different policies on the developing countries, that was not actually replacing the domestic policies of these developing countries. Now, a policy, international policy, should not be such that to replace the policies or independence of the developing countries. Now, the difference that was allowed or granted to the developing countries, that actually created different types of labor laws, welfare state in different countries. Liberalization that which was imposed during that period, that was actually in line with the fact that it will not harm the domestic policies of the developing countries, and the security and stability provided by those policies actually did not create any kind of agitation during that period. And in 1970, when IMF lost its function of maintaining fixed exchange rate system, and because of oil price shock, actually countries started to these institutions basically started to lost their belief or rely on government, and a new political order started to emerge. And accordingly, this political order actually believed that state is barred and state is a constraint for economic development. At that point of time, the financial institutions which were actually providing finances to different countries, they also started to believe or consider state as a constraint. And the Bretton Woods institutions also started to believe that, and they also adopted this new philosophy. And as a result of that, the World Bank started to provide structural adjustment loans, and IMF started to take structural adjustment policies. And as a result of this, actually, the global economy actually shifted from globalization to hyper-globalization, and that was started with the creation of World Trade Organization in 1995. And from that point of time, these institutions started to provide loans to the developing countries with conditionalities, and these conditionalities actually for regulating the monetary system or regulating the macroeconomy of the developing countries. Now I will discuss the achievements of this institution. Actually, after Second World War, the global economy basically has grown at a very fast rate, and the credit also grows to these Bretton Woods institutions. And first of all, the World Trade Organization actually has lots of contribution to that. World trade grew in the quarter century from 1950 to 1975 at nearly double the rate at which world production grew. Liberalization of exchange controls generated truly international money and capital markets in which vast cross-border flows now take place around the clock. The World Bank directed long-term credits first to the war-devastated areas for reconstruction and then to the developing countries for overall growth and development. GATT produced a series of tariff bargaining rounds that resulted in substantial reductions in tariffs on manufactured products in the industrial world. Along with this, IMF also started to reduce the tariff barriers. Now, the MNCs or multinational corporations also played a huge role. They actually started to operate in many developing countries, and they also started to integrate their plans for the entire economic development. Now, the plan that was created by these institutions as well as multinational corporations, that was such that it was not being fit with the previously created framework, and for that a new system or hyper globalization is very much necessary. And multilateralism as well as transparency became the new order of the global economy, and the development started to grow, or economy started to grow at a very, very fast rate. Now I will conclude my lecture. First of all, in this lecture I have discussed how those Bretton Woods institutions were evolved from 1944. And then I discussed what are the systems and then their objectives and functions, and ultimately I have discussed the impact on global governance and its achievement. Thank you.